The crystal wine glass pinged against the heavy silver knife. Silence dropped over the grand dining room like a suffocating blanket. 30 of my relatives turned their heads in unison, their forks hovering frozen over their plates of roasted turkey and cranberry sauce. We were in the heart of Austin, Texas. But the chill radiating from the head of the Thanksgiving table was absolute. Gavin Bennett, my father, stood up from his carved mahogany chair. He smoothed the lapels of his tailored suit jacket and locked his cold eyes directly with mine. He flashed a practiced, political smile that never quite reached his eyes, and told the entire room that my salary as a special education teacher barely covered his monthly country club tab. He called me a glorified babysitter who wipes noses for a living. Someone across the long table snickered. Then, with the casual, dismissive wave of his hand, he ordered his 29-year-old daughter to leave the table and go to her childhood bedroom like a disobedient toddler. The room erupted. A chorus of 30 adults howled in laughter at my expense. I locked my jaw. I pressed my fingernails into my palms until the skin stung. I pushed my chair back, stood up, looked him dead in the eye, and gave him the only word he was ever going to get. All right. I turned my back and walked up the hardwood stairs. They thought they were breaking me. They genuinely believed that sending me to my room would reduce me to tears, forcing me to beg for my rightful place at the family table. They did not know I had the deed to the roof over their heads sitting quietly in my purse. My name is Brianna. I spend my days managing extreme emotional meltdowns, de-escalating aggressive physical outbursts, and enforcing strict boundaries with teenagers who lack basic impulse control. That is my daily reality as a special education teacher. I am trained to look past the screaming and identify the manipulative behavior driving it. So when a 63-year-old retired local politician threw a public tantrum to assert his dominance, it did not break my spirit. It just bored me. Gavin Bennett operates like a corrupt king, ruling a very small, very toxic kingdom. My older brother, Trevor, serves as his loyal finance bro prince, the golden child who can absolutely do no wrong. Trevor never missed a single chance to remind me of my lowly place in the hierarchy. He drove a luxury sports car, bought with a massive down payment courtesy of Gavin, while I strictly budgeted for weekly groceries. They shared cruel inside jokes, clinked their expensive bourbon glasses, and treated me like the hired household help. My mother, Monique, played the silent enabler, floating through the massive house like a ghost who traded her voice for financial security. Growing up in that house meant surviving a constant, exhausting psychological war. Gavin loved mocking my career choices. He loved praising Trevor's massive banking bonuses. But every time his cruel words landed, my mind snapped back to the absolute truth I had discovered exactly 3 weeks earlier. My grandmother passed away early in the fall. Gavin immediately assumed total control of her sprawling estate. He strutted around the property, claiming her antique grandfather clocks and Persian rugs as his own, making grand plans to gut the vintage kitchen and build an enormous outdoor pool. One evening, after a particularly long and expensive dinner at the country club, Gavin stumbled through the front door, heavy with expensive scotch and unearned arrogance. He collapsed into his favorite leather recliner and fell into a deep, snoring sleep. His suit jacket hung loosely off the armrest. The brass key to his private study caught the dim light from the hallway. His study was strictly off-limits to everyone in the family. The floorboards creaked under my weight. I held my breath, listening carefully to the heavy, rhythmic snoring coming from the living room. One wrong step, and Gavin would wake up in a rage. The brass key felt ice-cold in my sweating palm. I slipped it into the lock and turned it with agonizing slowness. The heavy oak door clicked open. The room smelled powerfully like cigar smoke, old leather, and unearned entitlement. I moved straight to his massive desk and grabbed his tablet. I typed in Trevor's birthday. The screen unlocked instantly. The narcissism was almost too incredibly easy to exploit. I tapped into his recent downloads. The very first document was a scanned, notarized letter from my grandmother. It detailed a legally binding, irrevocable trust. $1.2 million. Plus the massive, mortgage-free Austin estate we were currently standing in. The sole beneficiary was me. Not Gavin. Not Trevor. Me. I took a clear photo with my phone. But the rabbit hole went much deeper than simple greed. The next file was a chaotic chain of emails between Gavin and Trevor. Gavin's post-retirement political consulting firm was completely bankrupt. He owed massive, undisclosed sums to former political donors who expected favors. Trevor's finance firm was managing those failing accounts, actively hiding the devastating financial losses to prevent a massive public scandal. They were drowning in massive corporate debt. They desperately needed my grandmother's $1.2 million to avoid federal prison time. They were not just greedy men. They were desperate. Cornered animals. I did not confront him that night. Confronting a narcissist without a loaded gun is just handing them the bullets. First thing Monday morning, I walked into the downtown office of Marcus Foster, a sharp, zero-tolerance family attorney who despised corrupt politicians. I laid the photographs on his sprawling mahogany desk. Marcus verified the trust with the primary bank by noon. The estate legally belonged to me. The money belonged to me. We drafted a legally binding 30-day notice to vacate the premises. I folded the crisp paper and slid it into my winter coat pocket. But the paper trail was not finished. Marcus dug deeper and uncovered the second half of Gavin's desperate plot: to legally steal an irrevocable trust. The current trustee needs to prove the beneficiary is mentally incompetent. Gavin was actively conspiring with Dr. Evans, a corrupt country club physician. They were drafting a fake psychiatric affidavit claiming I was having a violent psychotic break, planning to place me under a total medical conservatorship. They wanted to lock me in a psychiatric ward and drain my entire inheritance to pay off their corporate debts. Texas is a one-party consent state for recording private conversations. You do not need to tell someone you are recording them, as long as you are an active part of the conversation. I kept my phone safely in my pocket on Thanksgiving morning. The house smelled incredibly rich, filled with the scent of roasted turkey and sage stuffing. I found Gavin alone in the kitchen, pouring himself an early glass of red wine. I leaned casually against the granite counter and asked him why he always treated me like a financial burden. I questioned his authority as a father. I deliberately poked the bear. His face flushed bright red. His fragile, inflated ego took the bait immediately. He stepped aggressively into my space and bragged about his absolute power over the family. He detailed exactly how much he was paying Dr. Evans to forge my medical records. He laughed coldly, stating no judge in the state would ever believe a hysterical schoolteacher over a respected former politician and a licensed medical professional. He outlined the entire felony conspiracy, word for clear word, right into my phone's hidden microphone. I smiled softly, told him we would see about that, and walked away to join the arriving guests. That brings us back to the Thanksgiving table. 30 relatives, all gathered in the grand dining room, finishing their pumpkin pie. Gavin cleared his throat loudly and demanded everyone's immediate attention. He loved using the family as a weapon. He loved a captive, obedient audience. This was his grand performance, the defining moment he planned to cement his legacy and completely erase my independence. He pulled a thick white envelope from his breast pocket and sighed heavily, painting a look of profound, fake sorrow across his aging face. He told the silent room that grandmother's passing had deeply unsettled my fragile mind. He pulled out the forged medical affidavit signed by Dr. Evans. He waved it around like a tragic white flag, claiming I was experiencing a severe psychological breakdown. He told my aunts, uncles, and cousins that for my own safety and well-being. He was taking legal control of my life. He announced that Trevor would exclusively manage the estate and the financial assets to ensure I was cared for. The relatives murmured in sympathetic agreement. Aunt Margaret, who always gossiped cruelly about my modest lifestyle, leaned forward in her chair, absorbing every toxic word like a sponge. Uncle Don shook his head, offering Gavin a look of profound, misplaced pity. They were all entirely complicit. By staying silent, by nodding along to the lies, they became active extensions of his abuse. My mother stared blankly at her porcelain plate, saying absolutely nothing. Trevor sat back in his expensive chair, swirling his wine, wearing a smug, victorious grin. Gavin looked utterly triumphant. He played the heartbroken patriarch perfectly, even wiping a fake tear from the corner of his eye. The trap was perfectly set. He had completely gaslit 30 people into believing I was insane, setting the stage to steal $1.2 million right in front of their faces. The silence in the room felt suffocating. They were all waiting eagerly for my reaction. They fully expected me to scream, to cry, to prove the hysterical woman narrative Gavin had just painted. The front door chimed loudly. Heavy, determined footsteps echoed down the hardwood hallway. Marcus Foster stepped into the dining room, his silver briefcase gripped tightly in his hand. I stepped out from the shadows of the staircase and walked straight toward the head of the table. I dropped a thick manila folder right next to the crystal gravy boat. Gavin's face twisted in pure, unadulterated rage. The veins in his neck bulged visibly against his crisp white collar. He slammed his fist violently on the table and screamed at Marcus to get out of his house, threatening to call the police for criminal trespassing. I leaned forward, resting my hands flat on the mahogany table, and dropped my pitch into the calm, authoritative tone I use to de-escalate aggressive teenagers. Use your inside voice. Gavin, yelling does not change a legal deed. The entire room stopped breathing. Marcus popped the metal latches on his briefcase. He pulled out the real, notarized trust document and read it aloud with booming authority. He clearly stated that the $1.2 million and the massive house we were currently standing in belonged solely and exclusively to me. Gavin sputtered uncontrollably, trying desperately to interrupt, claiming the trust was a fake and referencing his forged medical document. I reached calmly into my pocket, pulled out my phone, turned the volume to the absolute maximum, and hit play. Gavin's own voice echoed sharply off the crystal chandelier. The recording played his crystal-clear confession for everyone to hear. I am paying Evans $10,000 to sign the psych hold. You think anyone is going to believe a hysterical teacher over a retired judge and a doctor? We are taking the trust. Brianna. And you are going to smile and let it happen. The color completely drained from Gavin's face, leaving him a sickly pale gray. His mouth opened and closed silently like a dying fish. I watched the absolute destruction of my father's inflated ego happen in real time. The man who had terrorized my mother, belittled my career, and treated his own daughter like a disposable pawn was suddenly reduced to a stuttering, desperate mess. He tried to lunge forward to grab the manila folder, but Marcus pulled it back smoothly, warning him that assaulting a legal representative would just add another severe charge to his inevitable criminal indictment. Trevor gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles bone white, all of his smug arrogance evaporating into sheer, undeniable terror. The 30 relatives gasped loudly. The sympathy they held for Gavin vanished entirely, replaced by open, vocal disgust. Aunts covered their mouths in shock. Uncles shook their heads in disbelief. The audience he weaponized against me was now his jury, and they were looking at a monster. I slid the crisp 30-day notice to vacate across the table. It stopped right in front of Gavin's plate. You have 1 month to pack your bags and get out of my house. A narcissist never surrenders gracefully. A week later, Gavin tried to execute his spiteful, malicious backup plan. 2 police officers and a psychiatric crisis team showed up at my school in the middle of second period. Gavin had called in a wellness check, claiming I was violent and suicidal, trying to aggressively force the psych hold. I stepped into the hallway, completely unfazed. I handed the lead officer a pre-filed legal injunction from Marcus, blocking any and all medical intervention, along with a secure flash drive containing the kitchen recording. The police reviewed the paperwork, apologized profusely for the disruption, and left the campus peacefully. The true justice arrived 3 weeks later. Marcus forwarded the audio recording and the forged medical affidavit to the district attorney and the Texas Medical Board. Dr. Evans was immediately stripped of his medical license, terrified of spending his retirement in a concrete cell. The doctor quickly accepted a plea deal and turned state's witness against my father. Gavin was eating an expensive wedge salad on the patio of his country club when 2 plainclothes detectives walked up and placed him in handcuffs. They perp-walked him through the crowded dining room in front of all his elite friends, arresting him for felony conspiracy to commit fraud and filing a false police report. Trevor did not escape the fallout. Marcus formally reported his involvement in the hidden bankruptcy to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Trevor was stripped of all his financial licenses, permanently destroying his lucrative career in banking. My mother finally broke her 30-year silence. She filed for divorce, packed her bags, and asked timidly if she could stay in the guest wing of the estate. I told her yes. I watched Gavin's number pop up on my phone one last time from the county jail. I hit block, deleted the contact forever, and sat back on the sofa, listening to the absolute, unbroken peace of my own home. The judge's gavel finally fell 6 months later. The judge sentenced Gavin to 5 years in state prison, citing his severe abuse of authority and the malicious nature of the fraud against his own daughter. Trevor received 3 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a strict court order to pay restitution of $45,000 in legal fees. The community fallout was swift and brutal. The country club formally revoked Gavin's membership. The local political committees scrubbed his name from their historical brass plaques. The empire he built on intimidation and fake charm crumbled into dust, swept away by a single audio recording and a stack of undeniable paperwork. He lost absolutely everything because he assumed I would always remain the quiet, obedient scapegoat. A few months into his prison sentence, a heavy manila envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address belonged to the state penitentiary. Inside was a 4-page handwritten letter. Gavin did not apologize. Toxic people rarely do. Instead, he spun a massive web of guilt, claiming he only tried to take the money to protect the family legacy. He wrote that blood is thicker than water and reminded me that he was still my father. He demanded I contact the governor's office to appeal for early parole on his behalf. I read the letter standing calmly by the kitchen island. My pulse did not race. My hands did not shake. I walked over to the paper shredder, fed the 4 pages into the machine, and listened to the satisfying hum of the steel blades turning his manipulation into confetti. I did not reply. I did not send a rejection. I gave him the most powerful response a survivor can ever deliver. Absolute silence. I erased him from my reality. Life inside the Austin estate transformed completely. The heavy, suffocating tension that used to cling to the walls evaporated into the Texas heat. Healing is never a perfectly linear process. There were mornings I woke up expecting to find an angry text message lighting up my phone. There were afternoons I caught myself justifying their past behavior, conditioned by 30 years of gaslighting to believe I was always the problem. But slowly, the nervous system begins to regulate. You stop bracing for impact. I spent my weekends planting hydrangeas in the front garden, reclaiming the soil my grandmother loved so much. I hosted a summer barbecue and filled the backyard with my true chosen family, my fellow teachers, my closest friends, and the people who actually celebrated my existence gathered around the fire pit. We drank iced tea, laughed until our ribs ached, and watched the fireflies dance over the lawn. My chosen family helped me paint the dining room walls, covering the dreary beige with bright, vibrant colors. We purged the house of Gavin's heavy, oppressive antique furniture and replaced it with pieces that felt like sunlight and freedom. My mother sat in a lawn chair, holding a glass of lemonade, looking lighter and younger than she had in decades. She was finally learning who she was without a tyrant dictating her every single move. The house was no longer a battleground. It was a sanctuary. If you are watching this, and you are sitting at the children's table of your own life, taking insults just to keep the peace, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You cannot heal in the same environment that is making you sick. And you cannot negotiate with people who view your boundaries as an act of war. Surviving a toxic family system requires a fundamental rewiring of how you view love, loyalty, and conflict. I learned 3 vital rules through this nightmare, and they are the exact blueprint for reclaiming your personal freedom. Rule number 1. Silence is not consent, it is strategy. Society constantly tells victims of emotional abuse that they need to stand up for themselves loudly. They tell you to scream back, to demand respect, to fight fire with fire. That is terrible advice when dealing with a malignant narcissist. When you argue with them, you give them exactly what they want. You give them emotional fuel. You give them a reaction they can twist and use to paint you as the unstable one. When Gavin grounded me in front of 30 people, screaming back would have played perfectly into his trap. By saying all right and walking away, I starved his ego. I removed myself from his sick game and bought myself the quiet time needed to build an ironclad legal case. Your silence is not weakness. Your silence is the ultimate incubator for a checkmate. Do not waste your precious energy yelling at a brick wall. Save your energy. Gather your receipts. And strike when the victory is absolutely guaranteed. Rule number 2. Disarm the weaponized audience. Abusers love to operate in the shadows, but they execute their punishments in public. They use family gatherings, group text chat, and social media as courtrooms to isolate you. They want the crowd on their side because it reinforces their delusional superiority. You can never fight a weaponized audience with raw emotion. If you cry, they call you weak. If you yell, they call you crazy. You fight an audience with paper, documents, bank statements, legal notices, and audio recordings strip the abuser of their charismatic spell. When the audience sees the raw, ugly truth laid out in black and white, the abuser loses their power instantly. Facts do not care about family hierarchy. Bring the receipts, and watch their loyal followers scatter. Rule number 3. Closure comes from your own actions, not their apologies. This is the hardest truth to swallow. You will waste decades of your precious life waiting for a toxic parent or sibling to suddenly wake up, realize the pain they caused, and offer a genuine apology. That day is never coming. They are biologically incapable of taking true accountability because admitting fault shatters their fragile ego. Hoping for an apology is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. You replay the terrible memories in your head, drafting perfect arguments, imagining the moment they finally break down and admit they were wrong. It keeps you chained to them. It gives them free rent inside your mind long after they are physically gone. True liberation happens the second you realize their validation is completely worthless. I never got an apology from Gavin. I never got an apology from Trevor, but I did not need one to heal. Growth means accepting that the closure you desperately crave does not come from their mouths. It comes from the moment you decide you deserve better. It comes from the moment you stop waiting for their permission to exist and start evicting them from your mind. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share a last name. Blood does not make you family. Loyalty, respect, and mutual care make you family. Trust is earned through consistent, safe behavior, not owed because of a shared bloodline. Do not spend another holiday biting your tongue while someone disrespects your career, your partner, or your personal boundaries. Stop trying to mend a bridge that they are actively burning. Start building your paper trail. Secure your independence. If you have ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save your own sanity, tell me your story in the comments below. You are not alone in this fight. And your story might be the exact push someone else needs to finally walk out the front door. Hit the subscribe button if you believe peace is worth fighting for. Remember your absolute worth. Protect your peace fiercely. And never forget the ultimate truth of survival. The absolute best revenge is not a screaming match. It is an eviction.